Our session today is all about digital capacity, digital literacy, particularly around staff. Obviously that then, to some degree also affects students, but we're mostly targeting staff capacity today, which is something that I'm sure is quite pertinent to most of us in a TEL and support kind of role, in terms of how do we assist staff in gaining skills and how do we navigate those spaces in terms of ensuring that staff are confident in using technologies for teaching and learning. Dr. Naomi Barnes is a postdoctoral adjunct, senior research assistant at Griffith Institute for Educational Research, and she's discussing reconceptualising digital spaces to build staff digital capacity. Take it away, Naomi.
Okay, can everyone hear me? Yep, because I tested it. Okay, excellent. Okay, so I'm a what I suppose people would call a digital sociologist. So what I do is I look at the relationship. I don't just look at how to learn about digital literacy, how to be digitally literate. I look at the relationship between people in digital spaces. So I look at how people interact on social media, and it's not just that, but it's also, and in social and digital spaces, but it's also about how people interact with the actual digital tool itself. So it's like the sociology of how me and this and my smartphone, or me and Collaborate, or me and Twitter interact together and have a form of a relationship. So what I wanted to talk about today is, yeah, I suppose, Peter, a little bit like online body language, but also sort of like also effective relationships between us and our devices. So I think about how much, say students actually use their devices to yeah, like students use their devices to actually become part of a university. So their devices are actually part of the toolkit that they use in order to move into university spaces. And so I look at the relationship between those things. So am I able to change the... Yes, lots to do with digital identity. So am I able to change the slides? I'm sorry, I haven't seen Collaborate.
Yes, sorry, I'll just...
okay.
No, I'll just promote you. So, okay, you should have little left and right arrows now.
Yeah. Thank you. So basically, what I want you to do is just pick a digital tool that you feel like you know really well. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of an example of what the sorts of things I do when I teach digital literacy. And that is, I actually teach not how to, I teach the relationship between the tools. And that I'll sort of take you through how I do that and how I think about these things when we are through this thing. So I want you to think about a digital tool that you know well, and think about why you like it, what it does for you, but I also want you to think about how it frightens others off. Like, for example, Twitter seems to be very frightening for a lot of people, and I asked my students to think about why they are frightened of it. So actually get into that sort of realm of thinking about the emotional relationship between them and the tools. So when we're specialists in educating people to enhance their digital capacity, we often forget that there's this massive chasm between what we see as quite natural to ourselves, but to others it actually is quite terrifying. And digital tools do different things for different people and for different reasons, depending on their backgrounds and access to technology. So so before teaching someone to use a digital tool that I know quite well, it's actually, I try to assess my own relationship between that tool and myself in order to try and work out how I'm going to go about teaching it. So I like to use McLuhan's laws of media to refresh my memory before proceeding. And basically what you do with that is they've got oh no, lost sound. Is it me? Oh, I'm back now. Yeah, yeah, okay, excellent. All right, so excellent. Okay, so what I do is I have a look at how basically how the tool makes me feel nostalgic for things which have come from the past. So what's it actually connecting me to in the past? Because the reason we often use digital tools is because they're something nostalgic for us. A really, really good example of that is Facebook, in how a lot of people, yes, good old text chat, is in how Facebook, a lot of older people especially use it to keep in touch with their family and friends. So you'll often hear people saying things like, oh, I'm only on Facebook because I can keep in touch with my brothers and sisters who are living all over the world, and it's easier than writing hand letters. So it actually does something quite nostalgic for people. You also need to think about what it takes away from you. So when you start thinking about why people might not want to engage with a digital tool, or when you're trying to encourage them to do it, you need to think about what it's actually taking.
Oh no. Looks like Naomi just got booted. Ah, poor Naomi. I'll give it another quick minute. Feel free to add your questions while we wait and hope that Naomi comes back. Otherwise, maybe we'll switch to Oriel, but I'll give Naomi a minute or two just to get back into the room. Caroline, it looks like your mic still might be on as well. So yes, it could, I don't know, we usually don't have these issues. So maybe if you've got some questions, think about them now, put them in the text chat. That way we've got a few ready to go when towards the end. Terrific.
I'm back. Yeah, yeah, I'm back. So, so basically, I did a study with some academics a couple of years ago about about blogging and academia, and one of the pieces of information that we got as to why academics don't like blogging is they actually quite like the barrier between that the paywall gives them, that the journals give them, that the editors give them. So digital tools actually can eliminate that, something that makes people feel quite comfortable. And the other thing is how it might so what would happen is actually think about the scariest thing that could happen with a digital tool. So we think about things like trolling and those sorts of things in order to so we understand what sorts of things people might find difficult when they're engaging with a digital tool. So can I have my slide power back, or do you thank you. All right, so basically what I like to do with digital literacy is I actually think of it in the terms of fluency. I like using the fluency metaphor and the idea of dialects. And I think it's really, we would all know here, I like to use the word fluency it has been used in the past, and I really like this as a metaphor, because we all would know that there's no real such thing as a digital native. It doesn't actually work as a metaphor. But I like the idea of digital fluency, because then we can extend the metaphor into things like dialects. So each digital tool has a different digital dialect, basically. And the more we practice in certain, so there's things which connect the tools, but all in all, there is a different type of dialect between each tool. And it's just about reconceptualizing the use of digital tools within this digital dialect type realm. Okay, so when you're trying to teach, and one of the things we have to understand when we're teaching somebody digital dialect is that it actually requires more juggling than even a spoken dialect. So what you're being asked to do, what a person's being asked to do is first they have to understand what the writing is about. I remember the first time I ever came across Twitter, I couldn't read a tweet because of all the hashtags in it. And it's about the hashtags that are in it. I don't really understand how to deal with Twitter, because it doesn't read the way I'm used to it reading. And then there's certain oral languages, so people might write the way that they speak. So you might have GR8 rather than great. So there's oral language which needs to be overcome. There's the way things are visually represented. Sometimes they have audio. It's also about how you move your mouse around the space. So it's really easy to go from this Zachary Carter to the follow. So you can follow him quite easily because of how things move around the space. So that the gestures become important, where to find things on the page, how to represent yourselves, like Carolyn was talking about digital identity. Like, people have to think about that, and also about where the spatial representation is. Where are they going to keep it on their phone? Are they going to keep it on their laptops? Those sorts of things. So there's all these actual different parts that somebody has to juggle when they come to know a digital tool. So basically, I promised Beyonce. So basically, I wanted to just have a look at an example of someone who is fluent in several different digital dialects. So basically, Beyonce Knowles and her team are not simply fluent in making music and dancing. As we all know, they're building a pop empire, and it has required digital fluency in several digital dialects. She's basically intersected herself with the cultural phenomenon of Black Lives Matter. She's established a lingo with I Slay. She's calling herself the new Bill Gates. And basically she is speaking and bringing into the mainstream intersexual feminism. And she's been doing this all through the ability to manipulate several digital dialects. So if we were going to take Beyonce, and use Beyonce to help us teach digital, to increase staff capacity in digital literacy, this is how you might actually approach it, through this idea of the relationship between the machine and the person. So when you go to teach somebody digital literacy or digital fluency, how do you do it? So do you approach it as though you were telling, as though you're expecting them to be like Beyonce? Do you want them to be like Beyonce? Because while this is an attractive option, because it could involve millions and millions of dollars, it's not necessarily sustainable for somebody who's not invested in the idea to begin with. So it's not actually attractive. It might sound wonderful to be famous, but it isn't necessarily sustainable. So when you're teaching, are you using real life examples of how the tools work? How the tools work to begin to increase staff capacity. So you're linking their usefulness to showing them how they can be used. So basically, so it's kind of like what I would call in teacher education a pedagogy of digital literacy are you saying to them, because look what Beyonce can do with them, that means you could do with them this way? And as we have, as Tom said, not everybody wants to be Beyonce. No, not everybody is attracted to the idea of being Beyonce. And so therefore that's not necessarily a sustainable approach to teaching digital literacy either. I know it's hard to believe, but it is true. So what I would say is that when you going into teaching digital literacy or digital fluency, it's about going in with an attitude of talking to them about talking to people about how they can use the technology to enhance what they are passionate about. So how can the digital tool fade into the background and their passion come into the foreground? And that, I believe, is the approach where we're going to get most success and understanding and fluency, and people prepared to continue to try to use the tools and develop digital fluency. And so basically that's all I had to say. And are there any questions?
That was terrific, Naomi. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I can see a few people are posting things up. So I love the idea that we could encourage stuff to be like Beyonce. Yeah, I guess, have you had any experiences of working with staff where you've seen people change their minds about how they work with the technology based on, I guess, sparking a particular passion? I'm just thinking about, have you got any concrete examples or things that you've seen, or because I certainly love that idea, and I think based on some of my research, I've seen, found similar things, but it's always nice to kind of hear of examples of that.
One of the things that actually, I did a year-long project with academics trying to teach them to blog. They were, and it's sort of like the reason I didn't come up with these frameworks. These are from a theoretical frameworks within education technology, but I've seen it happen in the blogging sphere. So I was hired to teach staff to blog, but what they wanted was they wanted to use blogging to increase their impact. So they were going to blog as long as the blogging got them more citations. And that was the only reason they wanted to blog, and the whole thing crashed and burned. Nobody wanted to do it. So that's why it was like, so I think what it came down to in the end was the few that did blog. Well, that's interesting you say that, is I don't think that if you provide them with incentives and rewards for blogging, I don't think they're going to do it. You've got to show how a digital tool can actually tap into whatever they're researching, I believe, rather than what they are actually, rather than giving them rewards and impact and those sorts of things. So there was one academic that absolutely hated blogging, like hated it more than anything, but she ended up, she was somebody who developed methodologies, and she be like Bay, exactly. So she actually ended up using the experience to write an autoethnography of the barriers that technology posed to herself, and exploring that in relation to, and so basically it ended up tapping into her passion for giving her an autoethnographic type instance to explore in order for her to play with the methodology, for her to solve some problems, those sorts of things. So that we ended up, so that's sort of what I mean, is like it ended up being it wasn't the blogging faded into the background. It was the ability for her to play with the idea of blogging and her space, and talking about these sorts of things I've got up there on the screen. is the only piece of, in a year-long project, it's the only piece of output that came from it, basically, was when blogging wasn't the main idea.
Great, thanks so much, Naomi.
No
Just so that we don't run out of time, I might ask people to hold on to any other questions towards the end.